Mega Man X5 has a bit of an odd place in the series. People generally love X1, 2, 3, and 4, 6 and 7 are largely hated, and X8 isn't even on everybody's radar, but fans go back and forth on whether the 5th entry was good or if it was a misstep. When you take into account that this was also supposed to be the last game, its reputation gets even weirder. I'm Wes, the Explosion, and I have once again gotten all the Hunter medals for one of the X titles, meaning I'm finally ready to talk about X5. Let's start with the story since everything kinda feeds into this. You pick your preferred character, X or Zero, and after a quick intro stage where Sigma somehow gives the Statue of Liberty a makeover, you get to the real threat of the game, a space colony Sigma is attempting to drop on the Earth. You have 16 hours to come up with a solution, and 8 bosses to defeat to amass resources to do so. While you can still fight them in any order you like, 4 are pointed out at the start, each holding on to a part that can be used to increase the effectiveness of a giant laser cannon called the Enigma. If that fails, and it likely will, then your plan B is a shuttle mission to collide with the colony to finish destroying it, the other 4 bosses having a part to increase the success rate of that. There's a few issues with the way this plays out. First, it kinda makes it so that there's a right order for taking on the stages. Rather than taking on the boss with the best power or the one you feel the most comfortable with, your best bet is to start with Crescent Grizzly, letting the weakness chain thread you through the 4 bosses with cannon parts, and then continuing on with the 4 that had the shuttle pieces. Second, the hour ticks down each time you visit the stage select, but not if you hit continue. This not only adds an odd bit of pressure to the game, but also discourages people from trying different levels until they can find one they're able to beat. Of course, both of these are somewhat avoidable if you give it a bit of thought. There's still enough time to clear all the bosses, so you can go after another target, even if they're not one of the ones the game is telling you should be focusing on right then. And the timer problem can be gotten around by just reloading a save. The main problem I have is with the randomness of it. There are 3 endings you can get. If one of your gambits succeed, you can get a good ending with either X or Zero, whichever one you beat the final stage with. If both fail though, Zero gets a little wacky and isn't playable for the rest of the game, and you get the less than stellar ending. This really sucks since if you're trying to do a Zero run, that means that not only can you not complete this, but it leaves you stuck with X, who you probably have put very little effort into upgrading, and makes the last set of levels significantly harder. The other thing is that this is all RNG based. I wouldn't mind the 3 endings if you had more control over them, but even if you do everything right and get all the parts you're supposed to, you can still fail. On stream, I failed my Zero run and had to reload one of my X files where the shuttle worked to finish the game with a severely underpowered Zero. You can also fire the Enigma or launch the shuttle at any point in the game, so conversely, you can put no effort forth and still succeed. I once did that immediately after the intro stage and hit the colony, but ended up quitting in disgust by the whole randomness of it. The Legacy Collection further exacerbates the frustration by having 2 Hunter medals tied into this, one for succeeding with the Enigma, and another for seeing all 3 endings. Again, fun if you would've had more control, but for me, it had me reloading files over and over again for a few hours, beating a boss to try and nudge the RNG enough to get the Enigma to hit. Besides that, the story's okay. It deals with a lot of interesting lore stuff, like the nature of the Maverick virus, Zero's origin, and the relationship between him and X. A lot of the endings get a little melodramatic, at least for my taste, but given that this was originally supposed to be the last in the series, it makes sense that they'd want to make this one a little heavier. While having 3 games after this does cheapen things a little bit, if you go into it putting that to the back of your mind, and if luck is on your side, I think the plot's good enough to please most fans of the series. The time limit ties into a few of the game's mechanics as well. As the hours tick by, the bosses level up, making them stronger. And while I say stronger, all it really seems to do is lengthen their health bars. While I like the idea of bosses getting harder the longer you wait to kill them, making you be a bit more strategic in the order you face off against them, I kinda wish they did more with the idea. I would have rather of them gotten more aggressive, maybe throw in a few more moves, as opposed to just making them more of a damage sponge. But I still don't completely hate what they did here. Once the bosses get strong enough, they also start giving out better drops. In addition to getting their weapon, letting you choose between either more health or more weapon energy, and also dropping a chip you can equip to Zero or one of X's armors to boost their abilities. Again, this is neat, but most of the chips I got seem to either benefit X or, in a few cases, either, making the system feel a little slanted. This seems to be the case with a lot of the upgrades, too. You get 2 sub-tanks, a weapons tank, and an X-tank, like in X4. Most of the heart tanks, though, are either only obtainable by X or can only be retrieved by Zero by sacking a life. I can't hate this too much since making X more accessible, since he's the main character, makes sense, and once you master Zero, I would actually say he's the optimal choice. I think this just bothers me more on the level of someone who likes to collect everything. Something introduced in this game that does grate on me is the guide character, Alia. She will interrupt you for the most banal information imaginable, sometimes multiple times for the same obstacle. She totally kills all your forward momentum, both figuratively and literally. I think I've died every run due to her stopping me when I was leaping to safety in the fire level. It's kinda crazy that they did this, because while I get making the game more accessible, this, more than most other X titles, seems directed at the more die-hard fans of the series, and given that several of the things she tells you are things that you were left to figure out on your own in past games, like knocking down doors at the end of a screen to progress, I doubt too many people needed to be told anything here. Even if it were someone's first time, most info drops are worthless. A simple option to turn her off or the ability to ignore her would go a long way. You can't skip cutscenes either, come to think of it, which can be a bit annoying in follow-up runs. And lives are pointless in this game. If you get a checkpoint, you're there as long as you don't leave the level. On one playthrough, I even screwed up and lost at the boss rush, but choosing continue still left all the ones I had already defeated dead. This makes it almost better to get a game over, since that gives you the extra option to continue, save, or just go back to the stage select, though admittedly, if you were asked after every death, it would get annoying. While I don't necessarily hate this, especially since some of the harder levels, like the first Sigma stage, which is made of butts, would be super frustrating if they used the typical way of doing things, I really don't understand what the point of putting a live system in was. It's just another thing that baffles me. X is playable, as you'd expect in a Mega Man X game. Not that that's a jab at anyone. He can jump, shoot, and dash like normal, but there's a few unique things for him in this title. Both him and Zero can now duck. This is huge for avoidance because, while it might not seem like much, being able to just hold down rather than needing to jump around or dash underneath an attack is much simpler and lets you hold a position. You can also teabag. The crazy thing with X this time around is how many armors he gets. The regular armor is just standard, giving you a charge shot and not much else. The Falcon armor has a pretty piddly charge shot, but can fly freely through the air for a pretty decent length of time, destroying platforming sections. You also damage enemies as you fly and are largely invincible, so it's pretty sweet. Then there's the Gaia armor, which is slow and heavy but can walk on spikes, and while the shots from its buster might not travel as far, they're pretty meaty. Both armors are definitely useful and I like them, I just don't like the way you have to assemble them. In previous games, you would get them piece by piece, gradually getting stronger and having the parts fully functional as soon as you left the capsule. Here though, you need all 4 pieces to use it, making it an all or nothing prospect. I imagine it's because, with there being multiple sets, it would have been hard to make it so that you could mix and match. Of course, almost as if they saw this being a likely complaint, Capcom threw something in to make this more tolerable. When you start up a playthrough, you can pick either X or Zero for the intro, and whichever you start with gets a bonus. In X's case, he gets the 4th armor, from the last game. Despite my bias for the original, this might actually be the best armor in the series, what with its charge shot that leaves behind a damage over time energy sphere, and you being able to choose between either the standard air dash or a hover while in the air. Having this from the get-go is pretty crazy, almost feeling overpowered. Then there's also the secret power-up in this game, the Ultimate Armor. It functions largely the same as the 4th armor, but restores the Nova Strike functions with unlimited uses to boot. This sends X dashing through the air, dealing a ton of damage and giving him iframes. The only real downside is that you're pretty vulnerable when you come out of it, so you have to mind spacing, but given how late in the game you get it and that it requires secret knowledge to find it, I doubt too many people who manage to grab it will have too many problems. I also love how you find it in the game. Normally you'd have to put in a code to get the Ultimate Armor, which feels like cheating. With this though, they went back to how the first 3 games did things, being in a hidden spot with special requirements so that it feels earned. The other playable character is Zero, and he's awesome. He starts out with a sword and an air dash, as normal, but he gets more options the more bosses he takes out. Some are interesting, some situational, some are tricky to use since it's hard to tell where the sweet spot is with your attack's hitbox and your own, making it likely you'll take damage when using it. Some are really good though and make Zero quite formidable, like the move that gives him a double jump and an aerial spin attack. Despite close range being a trickier attack prospect than just firing away from afar, Zero attacks fast and hard and is a bit quicker than X, so if you get his abilities down, you can rip through most enemies, even bosses, and is my preferred character to play with at this point. His intro bonus is the Zero Buster, which is just a basic attack where you kinda plink the enemy. It's not much and I constantly forget that I have it, but as I said before, I think Zero gets less power-ups by design, and it wouldn't surprise me if there are a few enemies and situations where it really puts in work that I just never discovered. And hey, by the same method that X can get the ultimate armor, you can unlock Black Zero, really buffing his stats. You can only get one during a run though, so choose carefully. Unless the shuttle failed. Then just get ultimate armor. For some general points, the game looks good. The graphics are of that pixelated, kind of anime looking style from that era of gaming that I think look good and hold up well, though I could be getting old. For music, it's a Mega Man game, so it's pretty darn good. I don't even remember any tracks that I would call downright okay, the soundtrack is just pretty strong. All the cutscenes are text, so no awkward voice acting, the only instances of that being X and Zero themselves, saying a few lines and making a few sounds during gameplay, which sound fine. The boss designs are good, Dynamo and Volt Kraken being personal favorites of mine, and the intro boss certainly leaves an impression. Each stage looks unique, other than the last few which had the same design on purpose, and most levels are pretty well laid out too. Other than when Aelia is yakking my ear off, I generally have fun running through them and each upgrade is well placed, requiring either skill or intuition to snag. There's only about 2 or 3 stages I'd want to skip, which out of 13 ain't bad. This game was originally meant to be the end of the X series, and because of this, the team behind it seemed to really want to do things big. I imagine this is probably why they played around with some of the things I was kinda iffy on, like the bosses leveling up and the multiple endings, but it also shows in just how much the game plays on nostalgia. There's a lot of references to past games throughout this, from Bubble Crab's music showing up, past characters being referenced, one of the bosses being a member of Repliforce, Rongda Bongda coming back up, how some of the levels are structured, and some stuff I'm likely forgetting. I like this on paper, but it can be implemented a little clumsily at points. The main examples of this are the Sigma stages. The first one has the security lasers from Quickman's level, you even having a time stop ability to help you through it, and at the end, you fight the Shadow Devil, this game's iteration of the original Mega Man's Yellow Devil. Both of these elements were incredibly notorious in their original games, perhaps even the most infamous, so why they chose the 2 most pull your hair out frustrating parts to represent each is a questionable decision to say the least. To compensate for X and Zero's expanded movesets, they even made the Shadow Devil harder than Yellow, which is understandable, but honestly, I'd rather fight the original. Then there's the level after that, designed to be like the first Sigma stage from the first X, complete with the impossible tower climb. However, whereas originally it was meant to teach you to use your charge specials, the optimal solution being to power up Sting Chameleon's weapon to become invincible and make the climb as quickly as possible, here it just feels unfair. Unless I'm missing a function. Overall, I like what they were going for here and do enjoy many of the instances of nostalgia baiting, but others feel a bit misguided. Overall, Mega Man X5 is a game I have very mixed feelings on. On one hand, the game is fun to play and has a lot of neat ideas. On the other, it has too many ideas, several of them implemented poorly, and that can really drag the game down. This was meant to be the X series finale, and I think if it had been, I'd be a lot more forgiving. However, it not being the epic send-off as it was envisioned, but instead being just another X title, it takes away some of the bonus points. If I had to give it a number, I'd say that I had fun with about 2/3 of my time with this game, which, as that would come out to 66.6 repeating percentage-wise, is just shy of a passing grade, and I think that sums up my feelings for it. I really wish I could give it some extra credit or something to just push it over the line of me liking it, but it's just not quite there. This was also before the time of patches, which is a shame because I think 1 or 2 small tweaks would be all it would take for me to truly enjoy it. Maybe Aelia being a bit quieter, the story being less RNG based, or the Shadow Devil encounter being just less drawn out. Still though, after playing it a few times over last weekend, I did go from really not liking it to kind of almost maybe liking it, and I'm willing to do a few more runs in the future, so maybe one day we will come to an understanding. Not having to worry about the Hunter medals anymore will probably help. That's my take on it, but what about you? When it comes to X5, do you love it, hate it, or are you also confused? Do you prefer playing as X or Zero? And for bonus points, do you think the Mega Man franchise as a whole would have been better off if this had been the grand finale? Really kinda looking forward to hearing some other opinions on this one. For right now though, thanks for watching and maybe consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video and would like to see more Mega Man content. See ya!